Three, two, and we are live. Welcome, everyone. Good to see you all back. Those of you who have read the community post will know that I was in, of all places, Mongolia via Beijing. Um, yeah, which was very exotic, very interesting, and hopefully not something I have to repeat anytime soon. Um, but we can chat about that another time. So yeah, we've got SDRC, Philip, Basilget, Villainous, Moshe, Noam. Welcome everyone. And today my guest is Elaine Ellinger, and she is the author of a book which we're going to be discussing. And of course, the topic is Islam in the modern world today, the threat of Islam as a social and political force. And the book is Timeless Essays about Islam and its doctrine, and also what we can do about it. So hello, Elaine. Welcome.
Well, hello, Lloyd. Really nice to be here. And
Yeah,
and
so
thank
Elaine.
you. Thanks very much for giving me a chance to talk about the book. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. You contacted me because you have been involved with doing writing work on Islam and seeing its effects in Canada. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got involved and why you feel this is so important for you?
Well, things have changed a lot. Oh yeah, I see. I haven't done a live stream like this before, so I see. There's a question. It's well, we'll get to that. Okay.
I'll tackle that in a minute. Yeah, but
Okay. So I got involved, and there's really been a change in Canada in the last couple of decades. And if you're a young person, say you're 20, 30 years old, this all seems normal to you. It doesn't seem normal to me. So back in 1983, I was working as a social worker, and I was also the court worker. And this is in British Columbia. And I needed to. I shared a house for a while, and everybody vacated over Christmas except me and a young fellow I didn't know that well. He'd come from Iran, and over Christmas, he told me about his experience. And how it came about was it was like Christmas Eve, and we didn't have a tree. And this is what I mean, like multiculturalism in Canada used to be very organic, right? And
mm-hmm.
here's the two of us, and I said, hey, you want to come with me? We'll go get a tree. And I grab a saw, and he hops in the car. And what he thought coming from Iran, and suddenly we're out with a saw cutting down a tree in the snow, I don't know. But we had such a wonderful evening. And during the evening, we're decorating the tree with popcorn and stuff. And he's telling me things I could hardly credit, how they had this revolution in Iran, and people were killed just because they were Baha'i. His friends were tortured. They were thrown in jail. And I thought, oh my gosh, what a terrible government. And the thing is, even today, people are saying, oh, it's a terrible government. And they don't realize that the doctrine is the basis of it. The government wouldn't be able to do these things if it didn't have the support of the doctrine. I mean, when you have an Islamic State, it has that name for a reason. It's because it practices Islam. So I need a drink of water here.
Understood.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So
crazy that
that was the
with
beginning.
Iran today,
Yeah.
you've got people who are protesting and being arrested, murdered, tortured, in prison, disappeared for because they aren't wearing the hijab. And in
Yeah.
the West, you've got Westerners going, yeah, that's so cool. Let's wear the
Oh,
hijab.
I
And
know.
they don't realize this is actually a part of the creep of Islamization, and
Yeah.
people are being murdered for not wearing it. And in the West, they're accepting it as if it's some kind of virtue that they're performing.
Yes. Yes. And just yesterday, there was a girl on LinkedIn, young woman, and she was very nice. I mean, sometimes people call you names because you want to talk about Islam, and honestly, it's not surprising because of what's happening in the schools now. But she said there had been a post about this woman being stoned to death, and that's her sentence. It's in Afghanistan, and there was a picture
Hmm.
of her, and I had made some comment underneath, and she said, I hope you understand that this has this is all to do with the culture. This has nothing to do with the religion. Now, she's living in Toronto, and I'm sure she really believes that. But it is absolutely because of the belief system. And so I gave her back all of the doctrine. And I also pointed out that the people that are at the head of these governments, for example, the Ayatollah Khomeini, he's an imam, and he's written extensively, about the doctrine, and he's credited as being absolutely brilliant about the doctrine. So yes, it has everything to do with the doctrine.
Yeah, I came across a woman who's very anti-Israel, very pro Hamas, very pro Gaza and Palestine. She's Catholic, but she started to tell me about various, reasons why Gaza this and Israel that. And I said, hold on, wait, are you familiar with the doctrine of Islam? And she refused to listen to that. She did not want to entertain any Islamic doctrine. She says, don't give me religion.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's a complete denial. And this is someone who clearly supports Islamic terrorism, is abjectly ignorant of the doctrine, believes that they are simply doing charity, doing good by supporting a terrorist organization who are oppressed. And I think people need to realize that being black, being African, being not white doesn't make you good. Just let's just say I'm not exactly incredibly politically correct on this channel. I think people understand my position on a number of issues. So yeah, there's just the fact that they simply will take the inferior position based on bad ideas and somehow claim that that's oppression when it's actually just ignorance, stupidity, and very bad ideas embedded in the culture causing them to fail at life. In many cases, this is the case. It's not oppression.
Yeah, yeah. Well, before we began, you told me a little bit about how you got involved in this, Lloyd. So, would
Yeah.
you mind just repeating that? Because that was very interesting
Very
for
short
people who are
version.
new.
So 11 years in the Middle East. I worked in security for most of that, and traveled extensively across the Middle East, saw the dysfunction, but also living in Dubai and traveling across, Iraq, traveling in Lebanon, Jordan, and other places like that. You get these whispers, you get these, this fear of sharia, people saying, well, the law affected me like this, and it's completely opposite to Western law, but there was never a clear answer. And then eventually I enrolled online at Leiden University in a course on on counterterrorism. And of course, the Bataclan happened in, I think, 2015, the massacres in Paris. And what happened is, after Raqqa fell, what happened is there was a release of a cache of documents, which was just for a short time. I had access to this. And Muslims were going, well, these aren't realist Muslims. They hijacked Islam, and these are radicals, and they follow radical ideologies. And
Yeah,
when the books were released, it was standard, normal, everyday, common
yeah,
or garden Islamic texts. And
yeah,
the imams were formally trained at standard, regular Islamic schools.
yeah,
And so that's when I came across, really, I saw the value of, I'd come across some of these before, but then I really saw the application, like the Reliance of the Traveler and other texts, and how they actually apply these. I posted these on the forum. I started discussing that, and very shortly after, I was banned. I mean,
yeah,
very, very quickly.
yeah,
And then I also learned how there are these housewives and 20-year-old geology students that are patrolling the forums to make sure that no
yeah,
one says
yeah,
anything that could be remotely considered disparaging against Islam. In other words, the truth.
yeah,
So yeah, and
yeah,
and also I discovered how terrified the academy staff are about offending the Muslims and creating any kind of backlash, and of course interfering with their funding.
yeah, yeah,
And final point, I'd also dated some girls, like one girl from Lebanon, Muslim girl, another girl, a Palestinian, and you saw how they live double lives and live in terror and fear of being found by their family and literally being murdered by their brothers or their
yeah,
fathers or their family members, and the anxiety and the stress that this causes, and yeah, these crazy social rules, and you want to define what are the reasons for it. And
yeah,
once you start digging into you can find, shall we say, vaguer references in the hadiths and tafsirs and so on in the Quran, but once you go into the Sharia, you start to see the exact black and white explanations for these things. So
yeah.
hopefully that gives you an insight.
Yeah, yeah. Honor killings, that's something that Canada used to keep track of. And they stopped doing that in 2010. There's a lot of things that, the country doesn't seem to keep track of like it used to. But when you're talking about reading the texts of like the Al Qaeda reader, Raymond Abraham, Raymond Abraham, yes. He did a book, and he called it let me see, the Al Qaeda reader, and it's got all of this writing of people like Bin Laden, and honestly, it's like reading the Quran because they use the doctrine. That's the justification, right? And so, actually, if I could share the screen for a minute, because I want people to understand that like, to me, truth is really important. And when
now
I
you've got to
see,
click on the present button on the bottom.
yeah, okay, so share screen, select window. There we go.
Select full screen, it'll be easier. Just select the full screen.
I probably didn't, but anyway, there we go. I made these this morning, actually, to show people, because I thought this subject might come up. And you see, this is the sort of thing that is presented to people. This is what they hear in the public square. So I can't see you right now. Can you see me, or can we just see the screen?
Yeah, we're both showing up.
We're both showing up. Can you see the screen?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So here is what people tend to see in the public square. Whoever kills an innocent person, it's as though he has killed entire humanity. Now, I think probably many people listening to this program will have heard that, and it comes from the Quran, right? And there's a book, and I won't name the author. I don't want to get into personalities and things like that. And the person may mean very well, okay? They might have very good intentions and just want all the disagreements to stop and the confusion and such. But this doesn't help. So this is actually at the beginning of a chapter. I was reading a book by a very well-known person. And this is how he leads one of his chapters. It's like an epigraph. Whoever kills an innocent person, it's as though he has killed entire humanity. Sounds so wonderful. And he just writes the Quran. He doesn't actually give the entire quote. He doesn't give the reference. So when you look at it in the book, now there's
even
several.
Barack Obama quoted that. Yeah, when you do screen shares like this, you should really try to fill the screen with much larger text. It's easier. 60-something% of people actually watch YouTube on. No, I don't mean by no. I mean making the text larger, as in using a bigger font size. 68% of people watch YouTube on their cell phones. So when you use text that you can read, it's not necessarily text.
Okay, well, it's going to get worse. So you're going to have to take my word for it.
You can make it larger. It's okay. You can fill the page. It's okay. You're not charged for that.
All right. So here it is in the actual, and I am sorry, you are going to have trouble, and I can't make this any bigger because it'll spoil the overall effect. So here is the part he took out.
Can you make the text larger again? Just select the text and just make the font larger.
All right. I'll do it, but I think you'll see what I mean in a minute. Okay. So
you can make it much larger. I mean, so yeah, make it. Remember, almost 70% of people are watching on a cell phone. So
yeah, I don't use one, so you see, I don't really know how that looks to them. But anyway, really, that many. So here it is actually from a translation. You'll see that's missing. The reason it's missing. So there are several translations that aren't quite exactly like what he said, but close. Okay. So whoever kills a soul, unless for a soul, like another person, or for corruption. Now, we need to think about what is corruption if you're in an Islamic state. Well, it's simply denying the doctrine. All right. But corruption in the land, it is if he has slain mankind entirely. But if you look at the entire verse, here's the entire verse. And this is going to go right off the screen. So we'll make it that big. The entire verse shows that this is actually only directed to Jewish people. We decreed upon the children of Israel. And it's actually referring to something in the Tanakh, the Old Testament. All right. But anyway, we decreed upon the children of Israel that whoever kills a soul for a soul or for corruption, all right, and that, like I say, is simply, denying the doctrine in the land. It's as if he slain mankind entirely, and whoever saved one, it's as if he saved it entirely. And our messengers came to them with clear proofs. Now, what that's talking about is prophets over time, has tried to convince the Jewish people that they should listen.
Mhm.
But even after that, many of them throughout the land were transgressors and didn't do what they should be doing. All right. But it entirely leaves so, this has been used at the beginning of a book. This
Yeah,
is
I mean,
what it
Barack
really
Obama
looks like.
quoted this.
And
Barack
then,
Obama gave credence to this as well because he quoted
exactly,
it falsely, and it comes from the Talmud, and it really, as Basil had
exactly.
mentioned, it refers to Abel
Yeah,
killing Cain, and that means an entire
yeah,
line of descendants is now dead. It's
that's
they speak
exact.
of the
Yes,
bloods, and this
that's
is a
right.
misrepresentation. Muslims do this all the time to
Hmm.
try to pretend that Islam is all about peace, and this is one of the many ways that they lie.
And it goes on to say, now we'll have to really figure out how we're going to do this. And we have things that are called actually the Quranic argument. You don't get everything in a single verse. Sometimes they carry on for 2 or 3 or 4 or 7 verses, right?
Hmm.
So the Quranic argument here, when you continue, can you see that, do you think?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Is that it carries on and it says, indeed, the penalty for those who wage war against Allah and his messenger, meaning Muhammad, meaning Islam, and strive upon the earth to cause corruption is none that they be killed or crucified, or that their hands and feet be cut off from the opposite sides, or they be exiled from the land, and that is a disgrace for them, and hereafter is a great punishment.
Hmm.
How does this actually, this is what it really is. Okay, so this is the public square. This is what you're told. This is the reality. And
Yeah.
just so you know, I'm not making it up. There it is. Okay, it's copied right straight out of the doctrine. And I'll just show one more. And we often hear this one: none of you will have faith till he wishes for his brother what he likes for himself. Actually, it says, none of you will have faith till he wishes for his Muslim brother what he likes for himself. And I didn't put that in there, and I'll show you I didn't put that in there. There it is, out of the, copied off the internet for his Muslim brother. So it's not the golden rule, okay? And yeah, so I'll come back to you now for a minute here.
Okay, no, that's interesting. I just want to mention something to, at the risk of annoying the viewer, but um, if there's one thing that people also lie and deceive about that I've learned coming at this as a Protestant is that people have the incorrect notion, misrepresent, and falsely present what the Catholic Church teaches. And this is part of a long standing practice that goes back even prior to Martin Luther, but certainly accelerated under Martin Luther and King Henry VIII. And this is a discussion. There were comments that Sharon made about Vatican II, so slightly off topic, but I just want to address this for a minute. And yes, even though some Catholics don't like this, that the Catholic Church teaches that Muslims worship the same God as Christians.
Yeah.
However, Sharon, they also teach very clearly that Muslims misrepresent that God. They mutilate that God. They completely debase that God. You need to maybe add that portion. Let's see if you're capable of finding those references and presenting them here as well, so that you aren't, in this case, misrepresenting by leaving out critical details, because you're presenting here a portion, just like the Muslims do with that particular verses 532 and 533. You are misrepresenting what the Catholic Church teaches. Now, we may have an issue with that, but this is an incomplete presentation that you're making here. So yes, and finally, we do have an issue with interfaith dialogues. That is certainly a problem, but
Yes,
let's also take that
absolutely.
more accurately. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah. So moving back to the topic at hand. So a couple of people have mentioned Islam being a revolutionary ideology. Yes, it is. In the Islamic Constitution of the Republic of Iran, they state that they must export their revolution worldwide, just like the Soviets did, just like the Marxists, the Leninists. They have exactly the same belief. They're both based on jihad, although, of course, they will call it revolution in communism and they call it jihad in Islam. And they're both revolutionary, as in they believe in using violence to enforce Islam. This is simply um, the commonality between these beliefs, because obviously the only way you can get people to accept them is through violence or deception. So there's a very strong similarity there. And yeah, and there was I wonder a couple of other questions. Someone mentioned it's all about money and power. I think that's oversimplifying it. That people are true believers. These are true believers. And when people simply try to make it about money and power, well, here's $5. Send me your PayPal address. I'll send you 10. I'll send you $10. I'd like you to believe something else. You know, and does that change your beliefs? No, it's because people have genuine, true belief in things. It's not as simple as just dismissing it as well, money and power.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And
yeah,
that's why, when I was talking about that chapter in that book, and I didn't say what book and I didn't say what person, this is somebody who's well-known moderate, and there's I have another book here, and it's the challenge of modernizing Islam, that one. And she interviews a number of people who are considered moderates, and I mean, I can't see inside people's heads. I don't know who is sincere, who isn't sincere, but certainly I'm sure some of them are, and they're wanting to do things like that's the book. So they're wanting to do things like, oh well, we'll get rid of the hadith. Well, you can't get rid of the hadith. You can't even
yeah.
practice Islam without the hadith. You can't. The 5 pillars are gone.
We just
Or like, this is absolutely impossible. I read that book. There isn't one realistic way of doing this, and you just end up
yeah,
going around in circles.
yeah.
So
So thank you, Eric, and much appreciated. Yeah, struggle culture and expansionism in the Soviets. We need a more detailed presentation on that. Someone did mention that to me as well. What is the overlap in terms of ideology with the Soviet beliefs and, of course, Islam? And I think I've mentioned a parallel here. They're not going to be exact, but if they both derive from Gnostic ideas, then we can start to see parallels, even Nazism based on Gnosticism. And on that point, on my X account, I've been posting recently about Nazism and fascism. And of course, what's happening in the UK, you get people saying, well, the far right, implying Nazis, and grandmothers and grandfathers and people who are afraid that their children will be murdered by illegal immigrants, of course, are now labeled as Nazis by the British state. But what I want to say with this is that fascism and Nazism are not right ideologies. They are non-Marxist forms of socialism. So when the Germans had the German Workers' Party, which became the National Socialist German Workers' Party, they meant it. They are socialists, just they are non-Marxist socialists because Marxism had failed up to that point. Marx had predicted that for instance, the UK population would rise up against their capitalist oppressors, and they did not, because capitalism uplifted them from poverty. So, of course, Marxism had failed, so the fascists and the Nazis wanted a different socialist approach. They were simply utilizing a different idea of socialism. They were not right-leaning. That is very much leftist, and that the idea of them being a right-leaning philosophy and ideology is just propaganda that came out of the Stalinist time to try to disassociate themselves. Okay, so moving on.
yeah.
So thank you
So
for that.
I I,
Sorry.
I, I wanted to mention like why I wrote the book, and
Yeah.
it's because like these conversations we're having here today is that people have got questions about different aspects of Islam and other things, but when I look at my shelves, like I do have a lot of books about Islam. It's a whole book on jihad, and there are many of those, of course. Or it's a whole book about somebody's life, or it's, a whole book about something else. And people, history especially, and
Yeah.
people can't make the connection between the history and what's happening now. And like you
Right.
say, the schools, the counter-terrorist groups, courses in that, which I'd like to talk about. They
Yeah.
absolutely want to deny it. They don't want to touch it. They are absolutely terrified of touching anything like theology. And so people need an overview. And that is to connect the doctrine with what is happening in the street. Now, an example is just a couple of weeks ago, the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, came out and he actually, I have a little, if I can just share again here, I'll just show you. I went and looked that up. Okay, so, okay, share entire screen. That's what you were suggesting, right? Right, allow. Okay, I guess that's it. So let's go over here.
Yeah. Let me just
So
find you. Sent me that link for Sadiq Khan's video as well. You want to play that?
Oh, you've got that there.
Well, you
Actually,
said that.
well,
Which minute is that in the text? Let me.
so now I got to find it here. Can you
I'll
see
drop
my
the link
screen?
in the chat anyway for everyone. So
Great.
you told me that Sadiq Khan claimed that Islam is an immutable trait,
Yes, yes,
like color
absolutely.
of your skin is it's an immutable trait, like where you were born. And so, what was the quote that he said? I'm just going to add you to the stage there. Yeah.
Where in the world is it? Ah, here we go. All right. Sadiq Khan, he said that, all of the riots that have been going on in the UK, that he felt triggered. And he says, it's difficult to explain the ripples when you've been targeted because of your religion or color of your skin. And you can't change either of those things. And then he goes on to talk about, people being afraid to leave home wearing a headscarf or going to a mosque. Well, you know, the idea that, if somebody hears that, like say a Brit hears that and goes, what do you mean? You can't change your religion. But now if a Muslim hears that, that seems perfectly normal. And that's what I mean about the
Mhm.
disconnect. These little things that, people know something's wrong and they can't quite put their finger on it, because apostasy is absolutely forbidden in Islam. That is a death sentence, right? So when
Right.
he says you can't change your religion, he really means that. And then, we have all of these programs going on, these international pacts on migration, and they wonder why there's a problem. Well, the Quran, the doctrine says you mustn't take those people as your friends, right? They're friends to one another. And you can't change your religion. And then people go, well, there's no integration. Well, you should have thought of that before, right? So I want to give an example. So you see, he's saying, you can't change your religion, and he's talking about the mosques here. Now, we all know that there's been a huge amount of anti-Semitism. I mean, a huge
Mhm.
amount in the last year. So in 2023, Canada's special representative on combating Islamophobia took these numbers you see here, okay? These are generated by the RCMP. And these are hate and, well, it's hate and hate speech and well, it's not exactly hate speech, but it's something like that. Anyway, she says this has gone up 71% against Muslims, but she's the special representative on combating Islamophobia. So that's all she said. She stopped right there, 71% increase. And this was broadcast all over the news, and people go, oh, that's horrible. She did not say that there had been a 260% increase against Catholics, or that Jews were 18 times more likely to be targeted, spelling error there, than Muslims from those same numbers.
So
So
I have
I
a
did,
question on this.
yeah,
Based on this, I have a question then. How many mosques have been burned down or vandalized in Canada in the last 2 years? I guess the answer is roughly zero. Whereas,
roughly,
how many churches have been vandalized, destroyed, or burned? How many mosques have
yeah,
been
yeah,
vandalized, destroyed, or
yeah,
burned,
yeah,
attacked in the
yeah,
last 2 years? And you're going to have
exactly.
hundreds.
Exactly. And then you hear the public square. You hear the what sounds like Christianity actually has got the golden rule here: whoever kills an innocent person. And they hear this, and then this reinforces the idea that there's no difference, that the doctrine is the same. And then it's like you were saying, they have these dawah events. This is, I was talking about the
I'm just going to
Post.
share
This is
something quickly.
stoning Medina. Here, I'll stop.
This is just off the cuff here. I mean, this is the very first
Yeah,
link I came across. 33 Canadian churches burned to the ground, totally destroyed. You can see this church is completely flattened. 24 confirmed arsons. Now, how
yeah.
many
And
mosques have had this
that's to the
problem?
ground. That's to the
Yeah,
ground. I
and we
mean,
know
there,
hundreds. I mean, I think the
yeah.
number is at least 200 churches
Well,
in Canada have
it's
been
over
attacked.
100 for sure that have been vandalized and burned, but of course not all down to the ground. But this is hard on the native people. I mean, my goodness, these are their churches too. And it's just who is coming along and doing this, because,
Yeah,
many people, they've been baptized there or whatever. It's just, it's important to them.
yeah. So nearly
Well,
100
that's been
churches
proven.
across Canada.
Well, I can't say it's been proven a lie. It's been proven nothing, because there's been absolutely no evidence that's been presented. Nothing.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
not been a thing. that whole story is so one-sided. I mean, I don't want to get into that, here,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the media are not helping anything. They really aren't. There
I
you
mean,
go.
this
Thank
doesn't
you.
it
Yeah.
lead us to think that the media is complicit? Either
Yeah.
they've secretly converted, or they have an inherent bias against their own culture. They believe that Western culture is evil, wrong, and any other alternative culture is good. So again, and therefore they take the side of the out group, and they consistently go against the in group, which would be Canadians, Americans, Brits, and French and Germans and so on, because they've been taught to hate their own culture. They've been taught to believe that foreign cultures are superior when these are actually primitive third world cultures.
Well, like I was saying about how, the integration in Canada was very organic. As a child, I read
Mhm.
books about how we were the north end of the Underground Railroad, right? Of Negro people. Well, they don't use that word anymore. Black people who were escaping, the U.S. South. All right, and they were coming here for safety. I was always very proud of that. I was very proud of Canada being a very welcoming country, and now it's being portrayed in an entirely different way. And I put that down to the schools because, for instance, if you read like a Saudi textbook, okay, I think I've
Mhm.
got an example of that in my slides there. If you read a Saudi textbook, the way that it portrays history is entirely different. It's very hateful towards the West, and of course, um, uh, all of the Islam being taught in schools is being vetted by people who are adherents to Islam. So they're going to teach it the way they know it, and it's an Islamic perspective rather than a non-Islamic perspective. Media is
Mhm.
not useful. Okay, yeah. So I mean, it's ridiculous that in a non-Islamic country you're teaching from an Islamic perspective.
Yeah.
There's so many people came here for safety, for heaven's sakes.
I don't think it was hijrah is one of the major Islamic imperatives. In fact, the Muslim calendar is based on migration, based on the year zero,
Yeah,
which is when Muslims migrated from Mecca to
yeah,
Medina. So, in other words, their most important, just like we have the birth of Jesus, is the Western calendar. The migration to Medina is the start, the beginning, the inception of the Muslim calendar, the Hijri. It's called the Hijri calendar, from
yeah,
Hijra, from
yeah.
migration. Migration is one of the major pillars of Islam, even if it's not explicitly stated.
Hmm.
It is a major fundamental doctrine of Islam, and these Muslims are migrating to spread Islam.
Well, I'm sure you know the hadith that after Mecca there is no hijra, only jihad, right? And jihad is the cause of Allah. So it shouldn't be any surprise that there are some people who define the cause of Allah one way and some who define it another. But if you actually look at the life of Muhammad, all right,
Mhm.
so what is the cause of Allah? 98% of the jihad is violent jihad. And
Mhm.
this is in the early texts. Like if you read the life of Muhammad by Ibn Ishaq, which is the earliest biography of Muhammad, it's very clear that the jihad was violent.
Actually, let me bring that up. So just let me bring up two references. This one here, this is so, do you realize that what you are committing yourselves in pledging your support to this man, it is to war against all and sundry.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
the Muslims who committed to Muhammad have pledged to make war against everyone. That's so, and then let's go here. There's a second reference to it here as well. Conditions of the pledge at the second pledge of Aqaba, because Muslims love to quote the first pledge of Aqaba, which is supposedly sort of peaceful. When Allah gave permission to his apostle to fight, the second Aqaba, or the second pledge of Aqaba, contained conditions involving war, which were not in the first act. They bound themselves to war against all and sundry for Allah and his apostle, and he promised them for faithful services the reward of paradise. So he promised them they will get paradise if they die in the purpose of war against everybody. And we pledge ourselves in war in complete obedience to the apostle, as they
yeah,
say here.
yeah. And
Yeah.
that I want to mention again, the girlfriends you had, and how
Yep.
frightened they were, and the disconnect. People here in the West who have some idealized idea of what it's like, and it simply isn't reality. And when I was a little girl, my father had a moving company, and he had two calendars every year. All right, there was the one with the little girl and a basket full of puppies, and then
Hmm.
there was the other calendar with a beautiful woman in a bathing suit. And it
Hmm.
depended on who you were, which calendar you got. Now, if he was doing some work for some mechanics who had a garage, they got the one with the girl in the beautiful bathing, or the beautiful girl in
You're
the
right.
bathing suit. Yes. But so there are many people who, like the girl yesterday, who wrote to me and said, this has nothing to do with the religion. This is what she has been told. But at the same time, there are other, imams, and many of them. I mean, we see that most people don't see it, but we see all of the videos and things that are coming out, and some of them are really shocking. And there's one in Canada who's quite well known, and the only reason he's well known is because he has a Muslim youth group, and his videos are he makes videos partly in Arabic, partly in English, so they actually hear the English, and he puts these videos up himself on YouTube. And so every once in a while somebody will notice one, like at Christmas, when he was telling his Muslim youth group that they're not to say Merry Christmas, they are not to return this greeting. So again, talking about today and making the connection between the doctrine and the events that are happening in the street. If you say Merry Christmas to somebody, or Christmas just gets erased, well, it's because of that, because to acknowledge Christmas is to say that God had a son. And as you know,
Right.
this is a basic concept of Christianity, and it is absolutely haram. It's as forbidden as it gets to say that God had a son. There is
And this
no
aligns.
Trinity, and
And
so it's an insult. And you don't insult Allah. If you insult Allah, we have all seen, that can have really terrible repercussions.
Yeah, and this aligns with the exact same behavior by socialists. Happy holidays,
Yeah,
because they also are erasing Christmas. I want to jump into the book, your book, Timeless Essays About Islam and Its Doctrine, what it
yeah,
includes and why it matters, which
yeah.
goes through, I think, 40 different chapters and also concludes with what we can do, because I think
Yes,
that last part is very important. So I have
it is.
I've highlighted just a handful of things I
Oh,
thought
have you? All
was
right.
interesting. I mean, there's so much, but I just thought I'd highlight a few things and show people a little bit so that they can see what the book is about. Then we can also discuss where they can get the book, and
I
also
wanted
noted.
people to make the connection between booty, okay, and Islam, because that is so rarely done. And in fact, there are literally hundreds of references between the Quran and Hadith. I've looked them up
And
about spoils of war and booty, and spoils of war includes human beings. So when Muhammad, for the first 13 years had only 150 followers and migrated to Medina with those people, at that time, there was intolerance but no violence. And when he got to Medina, that's when the violence began, the caravan robbing began, the conquests, fighting with all the neighbors, expansion of Islam, dramatic
mhm.
expansion. But it was all around booty and his followers fighting over the booty.
Is your book available on Amazon?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, they can search under your name, right?
Oh, yeah.
Elaine Ellinger.
Sure. If it gets
So
buried, I think you can find it under my name.
okay, so yeah, so just the book concludes or starts with a couple of these quotes. Quran 8:1. They ask you about the spoils of war, and the spoils are for Allah and the Messenger. So spoils is what pirates will take from people. So really, Muhammad, I think it's fair enough to classify him as a slave-owning pedophile pirate. I don't think that's an unfair characterization. But so fear Allah and adjust matters, okay. And then also you've got this: Allah's Messenger said, Allah guarantees him who strives in his cause, which is jihad, and whose motivation for going out is nothing but jihad in his cause, which is killing and being killed in jihad. This is not about some sort of inner activity, some sort of spiritual activity. And belief in his word that he will admit him into paradise if killed, or bring him back to his dwelling place, with what he gains of reward and booty. And they do mean booty in both senses of the word, I think, here. I think we can understand that this is booty in the sense of, well, as we would understand booty as in booty call with your women slaves, your female slaves, and B as your plunder. Would that be a fair? It might be slightly sarcastic, but is that an accurate representation?
Well, they are definitely part of the plunder. And, the men at first were a little bit nervous about this, because some of these women were married. And so they asked Muhammad about this. And he said, no, it's like whatever your right hand possesses. And in fact, as soon as a woman is taken captive, her previous marriage is considered over. It's annulled. That's it. And it's fine to go ahead and have sex with these women.
Let me just bring up the reference that I'm looking for to find. Let me go back to the beginning so that this can find it. I had the reference earlier.
I wonder if I've got that. Quran 4:24. You're entitled to up to 4 women as a wife. And also what your right hand possesses. And that's, you see, this Quran actually revelation came right after that question, because to clarify it for the men so that they would have no compunctions about doing this, that
sure,
they were allowed to have these women as well.
Here, I want to mention this. This is in the Reliance of the Travelers. So everyone has a reference. When a child or woman is taken captive, they become slaves by the fact of capture, and the woman's previous marriage is immediately annulled.
Yeah.
And she becomes the property of the man who has captured her. And of course, these laws have never been cancelled because they cannot ever be cancelled. They can be postponed if they're not doing this right now. But at some point, these laws remain on the books, and they can go back on the books. They can go back into effect. They're just at the moment not in effect right now.
Yeah.
So yeah. So back to your book. I want to, and they speak of booty. So I just wanted to go through some of the references in the, just so people can see the contents page, the index. Who are the experts on Islam, and can Islam be modernized? And then how to do your own research, Islamophobia.
I love that. I want people to go look for themselves, please.
Yeah.
And could I just tell you one little thing here? It's like I last year, I think it was, I was giving a talk for International Women's Day, and I had invited my square dancing group. And one of the women said to me, "Oh, is that the one at lunchtime?" Well, I hadn't heard of anything at lunchtime, so I went looking, and there was a girl from the university who was giving a talk about headgear, and I was quite sure that would get into the scarves. And so I went and listened to it. And, she started speaking about the hijab and how in Quebec, in Canada, they've forbidden any sort of religious anything in schools. Okay. And that was oppression. And that she wore it, if not ordinarily, but if she went to the mosque, she would wear it as a respect for her religion. And then she talked about Iran and the terrible government there, and how that was government and that was oppression. And I said, well, how is it that it's bad government when it's in Iran and it's religion when you wear it? Like, that doesn't really make sense. And so I quoted the Quran about wearing the hijab, because it goes on to say, well, there's a couple of different quotes from the Quran, but the one which, people will argue and say, oh, well, that's only about his wife, but it's not. The wives served as an example. And if you go to the tafsir and look at the commentary, yes, it's clearly that they're serving as an example, that they are to wear the headscarf so they will be known and not be assaulted. Now that becomes a national security risk for other countries. And there are all kinds of women in Europe who are now wearing the scarf in the hopes that they will not be assaulted, that they will thought to be Muslim. So it's, so I said to her, you can look it up. And she says to me, no, you misinterpret. Well, I don't misinterpret. I do not. And Islam encourages people to always go to the imam or the mullah or somebody else, that they can't read it themselves. Well, That argument might hold 14 centuries ago. It does not hold now. But people still have this belief that they can't figure it out themselves. They can certainly figure it out themselves. And I really want people to figure it out themselves. Sorry.
Yeah, just thinking of something. Actually, you just made me think of something. I don't know if this is going to be relevant, but let me see. This is on. I mean, the UK, I believe, has more. The UK has a large number of honor killings. So 12 to 15 reported honor killings per year in the United Kingdom. I'm sure the number is actually higher than that. But yeah, just something to note. The UK has a problem with Muslim honor killings. So, but back to the book, I want to go through a few things. So, can Islam be modernized? What is your thought on that? Because if we start removing certain aspects from the Quran, I mean, what are we left with? What's your thought on can Islam? Because there are Muslims trying to push this idea, and I think that these people are just propagandists who are either deluded or who are deceiving us.
Okay, yeah, it's one or the other, because they know the highest authority in Islam is the Quran and Hadith. And so this is magical thinking on the part of people
Actually,
living in the
technically,
West.
I think Bill
Sorry,
Warner is wrong on that point.
Allah and Muhammad.
It's the
These
Sharia.
are the highest authorities. So who is going to approve it? All right, because
Technically, no.
actually, what Muhammad said, like, we'll be accused of cherry picking. Okay, and what and the thing is, the cherries are there to be picked. But what the Quran actually says is, you believe a part of the scripture and reject the rest. Well, this is, you will suffer a grievous torment. You can't do that. It's in the Quran, and he said, whoever denies a verse of the Quran, it's permissible to strike his neck and execute him. And that's exactly what happens.
On that point, I possibly disagree there, because the final authority in Islam is the Sharia. The Sharia is the final interpretation of what is in all of the other sources.
Yeah,
It is
yeah,
the thing that separates what is abrogated from what is ambiguous.
yeah.
It defines and clarifies, and also it is the Sharia is the result of hundreds of years of deliberation and clarification and experience by the top scholars of Islam, the very top scholars of Islam, who clarified everything. And it is also detailed, it is clear, it is unambiguous. So, because you can still find contrary hadith, which were written by scholars who were trying to argue over points, and I mean, so much of that stuff is simply just.
Here's an example of
Yeah.
of that sort of jurisprudence that you're speaking of.
Yeah.
For people who haven't
So
seen it.
the jurisprudence is the final answer. It clarifies what is actually in effect and what is relevant, and also the various doctrines, things which are not explained within the Quran at all, and things which are literally contradictory within all of the other sources. But yeah, can we modernize Islam? Is it possible? Can we?
What do you think?
Of course not, because Islam has to be accepted wholesale. Anyone who rejects it is an apostate. And this person is then insulting Muhammad, insulting Allah, insulting the deen, and they are considered an enemy of the deen.
Exactly. You couldn't get past first base. Honestly, like I read there from the Quran, it's like immediately you can have your throat slit. And people don't want to acknowledge that there is violence. My goodness. Yesterday, I just went to the Religion of Peace. Now, this wonderful person has been keeping track, and they're all verified or they don't go up there, of all of the jihad that happens around the world, and people are talking about Israel right now. Well, I'm sorry, last month alone, there was jihad in 26 countries. And while Israel is very significant, our media are not giving a proper representation of jihad globally. And not only that, I mean, since 9/11, there's been 46,000, almost 46,000 different verified incidents of jihad.
Right. No, fair enough. I just want to find here. This should be pretty clear. The Muslims have a consensus that whoever insults Allah or His Messenger, or rejects anything from what has been revealed, such person is a disbeliever. And I do not know of anyone who differed concerning the obligation of killing such a person.
That's right.
So that is pretty clear within the sources. And you mentioned here how to do your own research, because obviously people are getting bad sources. There are good sources, but also bad sources. They are propagandists. What are your thoughts on how to do good research? Because you cover this in your book. What do you think
Yeah.
people should do to
Well,
educate themselves? And
yeah, absolutely. My website, I'm going to need to get a glass of water in here in a minute, but I didn't have a big enough one there. I seem to have drunk it all. But it's in the book, I give a couple of texts. This is one of them. All right. This one here, the Classic Manual of Islamic Law. All right.
Mhm.
And this is another one. Now, these aren't as easily searched online. This one can be, but it's a little awkward. This one, not really. Again, it could be, but it's very awkward. So I recommend downloading them. Just have them on your desk, and that makes them very searchable. Oh, thank you.
Mhm.
But other than that, there are some good websites. It is advisable to have more than one. I explain that in the book. If something doesn't seem quite right, go to another one. So, for example, sunnah.com is one of the ones for searching the hadith. Now, I was reading a hadith there, and it was that Aisha, that was the child bride of Muhammad, married at the age of 6 and consummated at age 9. So, and that's clearly in the hadith. It's recorded many, many times, and a lot of people don't even understand that. But she had been suspicious because he'd been sneaking off with other wives when it was supposed to be her turn. And he had gone out late one night and she had followed him. Well, a little bird told him he'd been followed, and he went back and he nudged her. Now tell me, would you write a hadith about getting nudged? I mean, you get nudged in the bus. It just didn't make sense.
No,
So
she was beaten.
I went to another source. And I looked there, and there it said struck and bruised, like a very hard strike. Well, I have a friend who's an Orientalist. I have a few friends actually who do speak Arabic. And that's another thing I'd like to mention about the Arabic. But anyway, so just to make sure, I gave it to them so that they could, look up the Arabic and make sure I had that right. And yes, it was struck. It wasn't nudged. Okay. And recently there's, you see the TikTokers and they're waving around their new Qurans where it says it's all right to spank your wife. It doesn't say it's all right to beat her, spank her. Yeah. I mean, no, that isn't what they said.
No, that also Basilgate has a very good point here. Reformers of Islam, when they speak of reforming Islam,
Yes.
really what they mean is taking it back to its original roots. In other words, going back to the aggressive violence of Muhammad. So really, that's what the Wahhabist movement is. That's what ISIS is. They
Well,
are going back to the early
yeah.
manifestation of Islam.
And the doctrine actually provides for that. It says every 100 years that there will be a great reformer who will reform Islam. And you don't think of reform in the terms of making better. It's a factory reset to make sure it goes back, because the power is given to the people who wield the sword. So of course, ultimately that power, because it's validated, all right, it frightens people, and it will triumph ultimately. Yeah,
And I
that's
mean, the
right.
Hadith does teach us a man will not be asked why he beat his wife.
Yeah, that's right.
And yeah,
In Canada, even when Muslims were less than 5% of the population, I think it's around that now, maybe a little more. But when they were less than 5%, they were disproportionately represented at the women's shelters. 40% of the Calgary shelter was Muslim women, and so
wow.
now they have their own shelters. So they're Islamic shelters. And this is the lack of integration I was speaking about earlier, but it's not good. And that imam I was speaking about earlier, who has the videos about Merry Christmas and numerous others that have become widely available. That Islamic Center is in Victoria, and they freely offer online. You can go there and you can apply for a legal or an Islamic marriage. It's not hidden at all. And so they have these Sharia councils that are happening all over the EU and the UK, where women are discriminated against terribly. For example, in inheritance, if there's if there's no child, a woman is entitled to a quarter of the estate. And if there's 4 wives, well, you've got to split it. Well, if there's a child, then she's entitled to 1/8 of the estate, splitting it with the other wives. And anyway, I'll let you go on.
So this is de facto. You have Western countries permitting Sharia law to
Yeah.
supplant Western law. And also, this is within the Sharia. It is permissible for a man to hit his wife if he believes that hitting her will bring her back to the right path. In other words, the beatings will continue until morale improves. And also the Prophet said, leave her as she does more than this. Once there was an altercation between the Prophet and Aisha, his 6-year-old bride. When they found Abu Bakr, her father, as their judge, Aisha said to the Prophet, you speak, but don't speak except truth. In other words, don't lie to me. At once, Abu Bakr gave her such a slap that blood began to ooze from her mouth. So that must have been a very big toothbrush he hit her with, or he hit her very hard with that toothbrush.
Dear.
Then he said, O enemy, will he speak but truth? Then she took refuge to the Prophet. So I guess we're looking at a little bit of abuse going on here. And Muhammad said nothing, didn't argue with his wife being beaten by her father such that blood came out of her mouth. So I guess, this is, I don't know how many
I have
women
not seen that one before. Where is that one?
This is from Ihya Ulum al-Din.
Okay.
Now, you mentioned every 100 years, and you have that reference in your book, that a renewer of the faith called the Mujaddid will arise. Yeah. And this is the most famous of the Mujaddids, the most senior of the Mujaddids, the man considered the proof of Islam, the Hujjat al-Islam. This is al-Ghazali in his masterwork, the Ihya Ulum al-Din. So
when you read some of these things, they're just horrible. Things that actually I can't even talk about here. They're just not good.
Yeah, I just want to go through. Let's just go through some of these things, just to briefly jump forward, right? Because you've got chapter 40 here.
There are.
The solution. I'd like to actually just before I go back to some of the other issues, I'd like to know more about your ideas in terms of solution, because we always hear about the problem, and I think let's put the cart before the horse for the moment, if we may.
Let's do that. Now, it's not that I will use some discretion when I talk about it, because for people who haven't read the book, they might go, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. All right, but if you read the book, you'll understand. And I made a little list of them here. And the first, of course, is to educate from the non-Islamic perspective in our schools. Like when you read what they teach in the Saudi school books, there is just no way that should be happening here. When things that happen in Canada now, for example, at Christmas, all right, in Edmonton, they light the bridge green to celebrate Ramadan. Okay, so while Christmas is getting shoved aside, Ramadan is getting a lot of prominence, and that's all part of this diversity. This new, not organic kind of multiculturalism that is confusing a lot of people, and it's certainly confusing the Baha'i, because they see this bridge being lit green to honor Muhammad, and this terrifies them. Okay, because this is the culture manifesting itself. This is the religion, the belief system, the system of governance. It's all of these things manifesting itself here, where they came for safety. I listened to a group, and it was Coptic Christians, and one of them was so afraid of repercussions for his family, he was hiding behind a wall when he was speaking, because some of them were still over there. So education from a non-Islamic perspective that includes these people who have been oppressed. I mean, there are wonderful experts around, yourself, Raymond Ibram. There are all sorts of people who can teach from a non-Islamic perspective in a non-Islamic country. I mean, that's just obvious. And then the other is to acknowledge the significance of Muhammad, because now I'm talking about counterterrorism. Okay. So you and I were speaking about this a couple of days ago, and like a friend of mine took a course in counterterrorism in Australia, and you could not speak to the doctrine. It's like it's not connected to what's happening at all. We are not going to speak about the doctrine. The first half of the exam, she got 95%. The second half, she spoke about Muhammad. She went ahead and she did it, and they gave her 65% because, well, for example, I went to a counterterrorism lecture that was being presented, and the person spoke, and this is from a very well recognized, a very well recognized counterterrorist professor, and that one's in my book. And she spoke for a good half hour about the far right and anti-Semitism, the Ku Klux Klan. She gets through the whole thing without mentioning Islam. Now, can you imagine? That was before October 7th, and this person's Jewish. And so I put my hand up and I said, how is it we're talking about, counterterrorism here? And, 80, 90% of designated terrorist groups in any non-Islamic country, well, I shouldn't say any, I haven't checked them all, but many are going to be Islamic groups. And because the names on them keep changing, it confuses people, but they're all jihadis, okay? Just, that's another one of the points I make in Solutions, and that is to use clear terminology. If you're afraid to say the word jihadi, how in the world are you ever going to address it? So I said, you haven't mentioned this, and the doctrine is full of anti-Semitism. I mean, an enormous amount, more than Mein Kampf. And she kind of
Mein Kampf can actually be translated literally as my jihad.
Yes, and she
also
kind of
every
off
one of the 20
yeah.
largest religious terrorist organizations is a Muslim Islamic organization. If you look at the top 20 religious terror organizations, every single one is Muslim.
Yeah,
this is the list right here.
And our counter-terrorist groups don't talk about it, and in the jails, all right, they're wondering why they're having such a problem with what they call Islamists, but it's like bin Laden. They're just using the doctrine. They're having trouble with this in the jails, and who do they call on to help with this? Well, they call on Islamic scholars and imams and such to come and talk to them. But is it going to be someone like Khomeini? Like how is this helping in the jails? Well, it's not helping in the jails. The situation's only getting worse. And certainly counter-terrorists not being willing to talk about Islam is just a big part of it. Okay, so that's...
Yeah, so we should, though. I mean, we as individuals, it's really up to us from a grassroots perspective to use social media to spread this information. Can I mention something about the KKK, which some of the newer audience members and some of the viewers may not be aware of? But there's obviously this aim to... The KKK uses the cross, and they burn the cross, which is sacrilege. Any group that burns the cross is actually doing sacrilege to the cross. Now, the holy book of the KKK is called the Quran. If you take away the L, you have the Quran, which may be familiar to some people. And the earliest symbol of the KKK was not the cross. The very first symbol of the KKK was the Islamic crescent and star.
Oh, I didn't know that. You are such a wealth of information, Lloyd.
This is the oldest preserved photograph of the earliest KKK uniform, and it's got the Muslim crescent and star on it. So you can see here another example, crescent and star. Of course, this maybe was a little bit too on the nose for them, and they changed it to start to adopt, obviously, the cross. But you can see multiple examples of this. And you can see here also, you've got the, as above, so below symbolism with the Baphomet symbol, one arm up, one arm down. So you've got that idea here. So you've got this, and this dates back. So you've got very much Islamic. And then, of course, the second highest rank in the KKK is not called the Pope. It's called the Caliph. Do you know of a religion that has caliphs in it? Have you heard of one?
No.
I'm trying to think. It must be Baha'i, Buddhist. Help me out here, please, Elaine.
I can't imagine. I have no idea.
The spaghetti monster religion, Caliph. Can someone in the audience help me? Which religion has caliphs in it?
Well,
then of course you have
the thing
the
is,
genie.
the thing is, Lloyd, this is why I want to send people to the doctrine, to keep it simple for them. Because, I mean, we can go down an awful lot of rabbit holes, and I know they're not rabbit holes. I mean, I know they're real. but it can, people get so easily confused, and they especially get confused because they have friends at work and stuff, and they hear all of these wonderful things, like, when we began the talk, and, they think it's the golden rule. This is why I refer people, please go to the Doctrine, find out what it really says for yourself, because otherwise we're just going to be confused forever.
Yeah. And just to mention, finally, so the imperial wizard is insisted by 10 genii. Genii are the people who brought incense and myrrh to Jesus in Bethlehem, right? Just
Uh,
help me out here.
well,
Am I
that
wrong?
that was actually the Magi. Those are Persians, and that
Oh,
was
the Magi. So the genii are
yeah,
an
yeah, you got
Islamic,
that.
Arabic,
Yeah, and the
Muslim king.
Zoroastrians. This is a wonderful,
And the
this
Grand
is the
Turk, the
thing. There's so
Turks,
many lovely Persians, and Islam is not the original belief system there, or
and
in any
Turks
of
are
these
Buddhists,
places.
right?
Oh, jeez. Are you talking about the Buddhist statues, these wonderful statues that were destroyed in Afghanistan? Are those
Yeah, and
the,
then of course
no,
they
yeah,
call blacks kun, which comes from the Arabic mushrikun, the
yeah.
disbelievers, the unbelievers, the yeah. So just wanted to add that out there, just so that people
Yeah,
know
yeah, from
that
the pre-Islamic time of ignorance, and we hear that, and people don't understand that before year zero in the Islamic calendar is considered the pre-Islamic period of ignorance. And in fact, that even applies to the hijab, because in the first 13 years there was no hijab. All right, that never came until 5
yeah.
years after the migration. And when they're talking about the hijab, they're saying, oh, well, we don't want it from the pre-Islamic period. Well, no, I'm sorry, Islam was around then. But those verses, those earlier verses, are abrogated by the later ones, and the later ones are the violent ones. Okay, so to get on with the book here, the principle of Darura, taser, as you were saying yesterday,
Taysir, Taysir.
taser. Yeah, my pronunciation is not the best.
Okay.
But now you see, this is another thing, is that so many of our authorities think that to learn anything about Islam, they need to call on a Muslim. Like, why? As much of the Quran is about the unbeliever as the believer. I mean, absolutely. And there was somebody who did a statistical analysis of the doctrine, Dr. Bill Warner, and he had come up with this number: 64% of the Quran was about the non-believer. And the skeptic that I am, I mean, I always have to verify everything, so I took my own Quran and I used the Quranic arguments, and I went through the book, and I got 63.9% of the Quran was about the unbeliever. And the Quranic arguments are what they've done and how they've behaved and what you can do to them and what's going to happen to them in the hereafter. And it's not good news. So the idea that, the unbeliever, the non-Muslim, should not be talking about the doctrine is just ridiculous. Of course we should be talking about the doctrine, because we factor in that doctrine a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So
No,
yeah,
true.
so nobody, and I don't even blame people, because this is ingrained from birth, is that you don't say anything critical about Islam. You really, it's very punishable. And so when we're asking people to give honest advice, it's just they can't tell you certain things. So it's really important to understand that it isn't essential that we have many of the things that our authorities are agreeing to. They don't understand it. Sharia. Somebody just said to me a couple of weeks ago, we don't have Sharia in Canada. I'm going, like, are you kidding? You go to the store, you've got your halal food, we've got Islamic finance in the banks, and you're telling me we don't have Sharia. People don't know what Sharia is. They think it's like some separate set of laws. It's a set of governance that follows Muslims around from the cradle to the grave. And part of it
Mm-hmm.
is that you are not to say anything negative about Islam, so or anything that will hurt the cause of Islam, which is the growth of Islam. And so they can't tell you. So it's like there's all sorts of things that are not mandatory. Like, if you go out for lunch and they don't have halal food, you can have a vegetarian lunch. There's no reason why not. And there's no harm in that. And likewise, you can take out
You
an
can eat pork
ordinary
too.
student loan. Yeah, you can take out an ordinary student loan. But as soon as our authorities approve Islamic finance, now the whole Ummah is going to pressure, or certainly elements within the Ummah, will pressure people to take the Islamic option, which we have now just authorized for them. So slowly but surely, different communities become Islamized, and that's how it happens. We didn't have Islamic finance a couple of decades ago. Well, now it's everywhere. And so
In
if
the US,
you're,
it's worth nearly $4 trillion, which is not nothing.
well, about 4 years ago, there was a headline, and this was, I think, the Toronto Sun or Toronto Star. And there was a man by the name of Tariq Fatah, and he had written an article, and it said, I think the headline was "Another Triumph for Sharia." And when I read that article, I actually ended up writing to the judge and sending her some, reading material. I was very nice about it, but she had called on an Islamic expert. It was in regards to a mortgage, and these plaintiffs felt that they had been cheated. They had been told that they had to take Islamic finance, and then the people who had financed them had walked off with their money. And so they went to court. So did the judge apply Canadian law? The judge called on an Islamic financial expert, and she said, that's actually in my book as well, that it was an incredible learning curve, and she was so appreciative, and now she understood, and she ruled in favor of the defendants because she said that Islamic finance is a pillar of Islam. Well, it is not a pillar of Islam.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So sorry, we need to know that it isn't necessary. Darura says, there's no harm that you can, if it's not available, if an Islamic option is not available, you can just, that's how, Muslims have been in Canada for decades, and we haven't had to have Islamic finance. We haven't had to have prayer rooms at schools. This is all a push that's coming now, and people are being told they have to do it, and they don't have to do it.
Yeah, but of course they become activists once you reach a certain mass. I mean, they're compliant in the beginning because they're following Taysir and Darura, which is ease and necessity, or lifting of these requirements of the Sharia, and then of course necessity. You do it because there's no other option, but you go along to get along until the point comes where you can agitate and you become an activist for enforcing this.
Yes.
And then of course, because we all want to be tolerant, we start to give ground, and we see them. They keep taking ground. They keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and that's how it goes. Yeah. You've got utilized. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I see I put a couple of quotes here. Scholars say there is no harm in giving a misleading impression of required by an interest in countenance by sacred law. And of course, that Sharia that's found in Reliance of the Traveler. And Muhammad said, whoever conceals the faults of a Muslim, Allah will conceal him his faults in this world and the day of resurrection. So you're actually rewarded in paradise if you have concealed the faults of a Muslim. Okay, that's Ibn Majah 225. It's a hadith. The talebearer will not enter paradise. So, saying anything that is counter to Islam is just not likely to happen. So, concise language, and the political science departments. I mean, why do we find that Islam is only, considered religious studies? It's a complete system of governance, 7th century governance. If you look at zakat, which is the Islamic tax, we pay, property taxes if you have a home, and in many countries, at least, how it will work is for property taxes, you'll see some of it goes to education, some of it goes to the hospital, etc. Well, zakat is the same way. It's 7th century governance, and there's 8 categories. And so they go to different, for different purposes. And let me see here, like as an example, one of those is jihad. So when we're, buying halal food, it's going to generate profit, and part of that profit will be paid as zakat, this Islamic tax, 2.5%. And zakat has 8 categories, and the categories are for the poor. All right. So if you're thinking of this as a 7th century government ministry, for the poor, this would be social services. and the needy, and this would be emergency relief, like short-term relief. For those who are employed to collect zakat, okay, so this is the public service. For bringing hearts together, and this is the Ministry of Public Information and Propaganda. For freeing captives or slaves, all right, so this is military, this involves ransom, prisoner exchange. For those in debt, that's financial services. For the cause of Allah, which is fi sabilillah, this is the
which is
military.
jihad. So a
That's
portion,
jihad.
1/7
And yeah,
of all Muslim charity goes to jihad,
yeah,
which
yeah.
is terrorism.
Oh,
And
yeah.
of course, none of this is legally allowed to be applied to non-Muslims. So they cannot give charity, or they'll do it as a propaganda move. But really, they should not be doing any of this. None of this money must go to Christians. All for Muslims only.
It's supposed to, yeah. And then finally, for the stranded traveler, we have emergency services. But it also says that you're supposed to spread that money about equally. And so is it really any surprise that 80-90% of designated terrorist groups are going to be Islamic, because the finance is there? I mean, the largest such trial they ever had in the US was the Muslim Brotherhood and the Holy Land
Holy
Foundation
Land
trial.
Foundation.
Absolutely, and they unearthed banker box after banker box of details about the Muslim Brotherhood and their plans to bring corruption, as it says in the Doctrine, how evil that is. So if you kill someone except for corruption, because corruption is considered so evil in Islam, but that's exactly what the Muslim Brotherhood documents say, is to bring about corruption and collapse its miserable house from within. And certainly we have seen a lot of that, but that isn't even talked about in places like the CIA and the FBI. I mean, I shouldn't say, I'm not in there, but I know people who worked in there, and a lot of that, after 9/11, it was very well known and talked about. Experts that were there around 2008, all of a sudden, all that information was expunged, and those people were not allowed to talk about it anymore.
Right. It's just a couple of interesting points before we come back to some of the other things I've noticed.
Solutions.
Few people are aware that now we've got the Kitab al-Sitta, you've got the 6 books, which is actually taken from the Talmud, which has different tractates,
Yeah,
and you have 6 major tractates. So,
yeah.
so they just copied that idea. But not all the hadiths have been translated, including many important collections. For
Yes.
instance, Musnad Ahmad, only 4%.
Yeah.
Few people realize this is an Arabic collection, whereas there are also collections in other languages like Hindi, right, from India, which are also highly authoritative, which are very prevalent in that region, but they have no English translations whatsoever. So there's not really just the 6 books, because there are other collections that no one's heard of that are very important too.
Yeah. And you'll see something like, for example, in Reliance of the Traveler, that handbook of Sharia law, and you'll go, well, what's the source for that? And you can't find it. And that's the reason you can't find it. It's not everything's been translated. But you mentioned Hindi, and exactly, particularly in what used to be called the free world. I don't know how long that's going to last. We aren't hearing about things like what's happening in Bangladesh right now. I mean, it's basically a genocide, and it's not the first. The Hindus have been slaughtered wholesale through jihad over the centuries, but you don't hear much about it.
Yeah, but of course, if you look at the UK, there've been riots and uprisings in the UK over what's happening in Bangladesh by Muslims. They rioted, and of course, the police did very little about that because of 2-tier policing, which is prevalent in the UK. But yeah, so these tribal problems spill over into Western countries where these Muslims go, and they take these tribal issues with them. You've still got these fights that are happening between these groups, which is just another. From the Cairo Declaration, to mention this, tell us what exactly. So we've got the Human Declaration of Human Rights.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you've got the Declaration of Human Lefts, or whatever, this Cairo Declaration, which is
this is such an enormous problem, and it explains so much. Is that back in 1948, the Islamic countries did not sign on to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And in 1990, they came up with their own called the Cairo Declaration. And it is the antithesis of, well, not completely, but yeah, pretty much. It's the antithesis of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And people don't realize that. Well, how can something like the United Nations be functional when it doesn't have no moral compass? It has two, and they point in opposite directions. And all of these people are still, we have people who follow an entirely different code of human rights that are making decisions that are going to affect everyone, and even put in front of, chairing human rights committees at the United Nations. And
Saudi Arabia human rights chair, and you're like, what?
it's just, yeah, because in Islam, and this is just huge, all right, there is no equality, all right, and it's not just men and women, it's also believers and unbelievers. And a really good example of that is in the Quran. Okay, it's got Quran 98:6, that the unbeliever is the worst of creatures. And there's another one, I think it's 7117, and it says that they are worse than cattle. Okay, but that's 98:6. Okay, 98:7 says the believers are the best of creatures. And if you're reading like Reliance of the Traveler, it and I talk about this window of opportunity. I think that's underneath the video today, that we are able to talk about this and we have the information, and how short that window is, that we need to take advantage of it while we can, because they have these blasphemy laws in the Islamic countries. They're not allowed to critique things. And now we're introducing things here. Oh dear, I'm talking about problems again, that are making people afraid here to speak about things. But when you have a belief system that does not allow equality between men and women, it does not allow equality between believers and non-believers, that humans are not all created equal, a belief system that allows slavery. This is all. And these are some things. I mean, Canada doesn't even have strong laws against slavery because we've never had it here. But you've got 130,000 estimated slaves in Nigeria alone. Like, slavery is definitely happening here now in the world. And this is not ancient, but the consistent ingredient is Islam. That's where this is where it's happening. So this is the thing. That I felt I needed to write, an essay about the Universal Declaration of human rights, because people don't understand this enormous difference. No equality, no freedom of religion. And of course, that is totally contrary to not only the Universal Declaration, but also the U.S. Constitution, the Canadian Charter, that we're allowing, Islamic or legal marriages to happen. This is against our civil law. And in the UK and the EU, we have all of these Sharia councils, which, the European Union in 2019 did a report on this, and how unfairly the women are being treated before these councils. Many of them don't even realize that they're able to go to the ordinary British court. And I mean, why do these exist? They're existing under the umbrella of arbitration. Okay, so the courts say, well, it's wonderful if you could decide something and you don't have to go to court, meaning a British court. But it's not so wonderful if you're going before an Islamic council and you happen to be a woman, or a gay person, or a religious minority. Well, that wouldn't happen unless you married into Islam. But whereas a Muslim man can marry a person of the book, a Christian or a Jew, in theory, all right, the children will be raised as Muslim, and a Muslim woman is not, like you were saying, allowed to date or go out with a non-Muslim man. I mean, it does happen, but you can buy books, stories of people that have done this, and they've suffered terribly just because they've fallen in love with someone outside of a belief system.
Right. There's interesting. The Arab Muslim slave trade, as it says here, the trans-Saharan trade, is the longest slave trade, having occurred for more than 1,300 years. Now,
Yeah.
I know people love to go on about the American slave trade, and that lasted, I think, a total of 82 years, something like that, but 82 years.
And it
So you've
was the
got a
British who put
1,300
an
year.
end to, yeah, yeah.
Yep, and Christians ended the slave trade, and you've got millions of Africans to work in foreign lands in the most inhumane conditions. Scholars have christened it a veiled genocide. Now you're looking at as many as 60 million people, and these Africans went to the Middle East. Now, how many black Middle Eastern countries do we have today? Can you think of any? Because they're
Yeah.
zero. They're
Yeah.
zero.
That's
Whereas
right.
Whereas the 350,000 black slaves, not the 60 million, the
Yeah.
350,000 or so black slaves that went to North America, maybe 500,000, let's say, to North America, being Canada and the US, they've now become 30, 40 million people. So it's a genocide that took them from 500,000 to 30, 40 million. So they multiplied by dozens of times. Whereas these 60 million black Africans that went to Saudi Arabia, where are they?
Yeah.
That'll be a
Well,
fascinating question to answer.
and the other thing is the white slave trade as well,
Yep.
and there there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people who were taken in the white slave trade. I was reading
No,
a book.
millions. In fact, there were
Yeah.
more white slaves taken from Europe to Africa than went from Africa to North America.
Oh,
More, several times
absolutely.
more. Several
Oh,
times more.
absolutely. And I was reading a book written in 1850. It's a lovely little book. It's very interesting to read because we actually have objective reporting. Okay, and that we whatever happened to objective reporting? It used to be a standard for journalism, but you don't see a lot of it now. Anyway, she was able to go to the harems in Cairo because her brother uh, um, was a high-ranking official, and so she was
Hmm.
able to get into some of the more exclusive harems. They were waited on by white slaves. Some of them were redheads, and this is 1850, and people just,
Scary.
yeah, don't talk about it. And how many of
Yeah,
those died as well? Many.
yeah, very large numbers. So we're coming up on an hour and a half.
Are
So
we
I,
really?
I try not to go too long because, I try to keep my talks maximum sort of 90 minutes.
Could
Um,
yeah, could I just briefly share my screen and
yeah,
see
yeah, please
and
do.
quickly go over that? I just put a few things there in case they came up, and I think a few
Yeah.
of them did. Share screen, and I'll just take the PowerPoint here again when I find it. There we go.
And what you can do is maybe show people the things you want to show them and discuss where to find your book. Just give a final summary again, and then
Yeah, yeah.
how people can find
All
your work
right.
and support you.
So, just quickly, we were talking about Christians and the early battles, and because this is something we hear constantly, and actually is in the Saudi school books as well, about the Crusades, and we're always hearing about the Crusaders. The black are the Crusades, all right. The gray are Jihad. This is the expansion. Now, this is, Mecca over here, Mecca and Medina, and this is where it spread to. So this was conquest. This is a little chart I made showing how the categories. Now, other belief systems don't actually have that. Charity is charity for the poor. And whereas this is actually more, you can see it's a system of governance, a 7th
Mm.
century
Just
system of
on
governance.
the point you have on slide 13, if you could just go back to slide 13.
Yeah.
I mean, the Muslims invaded Spain in the 600s. They were in France in the late 600s. They eventually had to be kicked out in the 700s. I mean, so are we to conclude then, because the Muslims, are so angry with the West, that the French invaded Saudi Arabia and the Middle East in the late 600s, and the Muslims went there for revenge? Or is it just the fact that Muslims have just been colonizing and invading everybody because that's what Muslims and Islam do?
Well, that's the thing, Islam, it typically, it begins and some of the, again, I'm not talking about people, I'm talking about Islam as an entity, all right, is that it'll begin with a mosque, an Islamic center, and the people cluster around it, and then the organization begins, and the organization provides the infrastructure, and now we start having more people, and now the demands begin, and it won't be everybody demanding. but people who are adherents, who are proponents of Islam. Well, if you're a proponent of Islam, then that means, and we're hearing that now in the EU all the time, that they want a caliphate. We're going, and so it has a progression, basically what are called, the 3 stages. It comes saying, we're oppressed, which is exactly what Muhammad did. He went to Medina as a supplicant. He said, they're being mean to me in Mecca, and of course he hadn't been very nice to them either, but, saying all their ancestors were going to be cursed if they didn't follow him and such. But he came as a supplicant, and within 5 years, there was not a Jew left in Medina. It was half the town. They're all gone. And then he started fighting with all his neighbors, and some of those Jews went to Kaibar. And what happened to them? The same thing, right? So I just wanted to show that, the zakat is still, okay, here it is in today's Sharia standards, all right? That this is standard procedure, that you collect zakat for jihad. And the Saudi school books, here's an example. And, we're getting these kind of examples in our schools here now. And they're constantly being, told that there's Islamophobia. There's, tons of material coming from Islamic organizations going into the schools. And the teachers think this is culture. Well, religion was forbidden in Canadian schools back in 1962. And I remember when that happened, because in the public school, they used to say, at least in this province, they would say the Lord's Prayer in the morning. That's all the religion there was, but it did happen. It was taken out. So now we're having hijab day in schools. Now, can you imagine that we're having cross day in schools? People would be outraged, all right? But it's introduced as being culture. But when it's spoken about to the government, then now it's religion. But this is a way to sort of, one day it's racist, one day it's culture, one day it's religion, but it's all the same thing. So here's an example of a Saudi school book, and it says, is belief true? And that means, in Islam, in the following instance, which is the correct answer? A man who prays but hates those who are virtuous. A man professes there is no deity other than God, but he loves the infidels. You see, that's forbidden.
Mm-hmm.
A man worships God alone, loves the believers, hates the infidels. This is Islam. All right. So I just wanted to show that what terrorism is. And so we're talking corruption in the land and how this is forbidden in Islam. And this will get you into jail in Saudi Arabia. Okay, the law considers a terrorist anyone who's calling for atheistic thought or calling into question the fundamentals of the Islamic religion. And if you're an infidel like you and me, then you're not allowed into the city of Mecca at all. You have to be a Muslim. A lot of people don't know that, to go to Medina. Mm-hmm. And this is what it used to be like in Afghanistan and Iran. And this is Afghanistan now. And a number of imams from the UK went to Afghanistan and said they felt at home there. It was so wonderful. Well, my goodness, how wonderful is that? This is Afghanistan now. And this is talking about a former member of parliament talking about the girls covering themselves with hijab so they won't be attacked. This is slavery today. This is slavery yesterday. And this is under the Ottomans. And this is, I think, Libya. Yeah. And this one is Syria and Niger. Here we have northern Iraq. More slavery. The ISIS documents set the price of Christian and Yazidi slaves. Here's the document, how much they cost. And this is what Canada did, to our everlasting shame. This girl who survived being an ISIS sex slave was booked to speak at one of our schools, and it was canceled over fears of generating Islamophobia. I mean, this is disgusting. So here we have examples of Tawriya, okay, giving a misleading impression. So this is from the museum, trusted institutions that can't be relied on. Museum, Islamic Museum in Melbourne, Australia. And all it talks about is one wife. He had 13, one wife. And then down here, how everyone loved him. Not one word about jihad. And he personally took part in 27 battles. And there was between 65 and 95, depending on your source, battles actually during his lifetime expeditions. This is marriage services offered here in Canada. All right. This is what the EU Assembly said about this. This is Gaza. This woman didn't have a hijab on. She was beaten. This is what people are in the streets screaming for, that they want. This was a reporter. She didn't have a hijab on. She was in Gaza. This is in Canada. This young girl who was killed because she was arguing with her family. She didn't want to wear the traditional hijab scarf. Her father and her brother killed her. And this is what's happening today with our young people. And that's why I'm doing this. Okay, stop sharing.
No, it's all very disturbing, and it's encroaching heavily. And any sort of final thoughts on what we as YouTube subscribers and YouTube content creators can do to create awareness to
stop
disrupt
talking.
the encroachment? So
yeah, we need more people talking. I encourage people to get my book, to read it, to give one to their favorite politician or their least favorite politician. And you know, another example of a solution is polygamy. You know, it's a huge problem, especially, and you can see that's going to be happening in Canada now as well, since we're offering these marriages in the EU. And I watched a video in Germany, and it was social services, and they're saying so many of these women are struggling so terribly, but they're not allowed to talk about it. That, you know, there's 4 wives, you can't look after them. Now, in an Islamic country, you would be expected to support them all, but here, many of them are ending up on social assistance, which isn't, you know, fair to the host country as well.
but it's jizya. They come here for the jizya.
Well, yes, that too. Okay, I don't know that everybody will understand that, but at a minimum, require imams to register every marriage. They don't have to. They don't have to. So they register the married couple. The gentleman will, you know, register his first marriage, and he won't register the rest. Well, if the imams had to register every marriage, then you know that this man's been to 4 different imams, and he's married his 4 wives. So you would know that the law was being broken. I mean, there's so many simple steps, and you know, some of them are in the.
I mean, the prevailing, even though it's not. Yeah, but the prevailing view by politicians today, though, at least the authorities, is that what is white and Western is bad, what is foreign is good, and any foreign culture is good, and white Westerners have been bad, therefore they deserve the punishment, and their culture is terrible, or they don't have culture. I mean, this is the de facto position, even if it's not necessarily articulated or stated or even lawful.
Yeah. But you know,
that is the view,
it's understandable given the billions that have come, and there's a story about that in my book too, the billions that have come into the former free world for the purpose of Islamization, and that's very clear. And it's work to treat, because you know, the way that it's being taught, the product is like that young girl yesterday who's saying this has nothing to do with the religion, and it has everything to do with the religion. And here's another young girl on the other side of the world being stoned to death. So we need to fix this. We need to talk about it.
No, and we do. I mean, I try my channel, and yeah, I think we all need to play a part here, because we can't necessarily rely on the government. Governments are not necessarily doing the right things.
Especially
in fact, the government
when
is often the enemy.
They think they're right. And earlier, a politician in Canada, he had a photo op with a man who, and I mean, you know, it was more than a photo op. You can't help who leans over your shoulder and takes a photo, you know, at an event. But this was, you know, dinner, wining, dining with someone who had actually written a book about how to beat your wife. You know, so they need to listen to people that they have been inoculated against not to listen to. And that's happening in the schools. They're hearing Islamophobia constantly at these dawa events that the churches are engaging in.
Yeah, I think though that these people are reacting to the fact that our message is growing. I think more and more of us. I mean, we're at the point now where I think that we as YouTubers even are more knowledgeable of Islamic sources than most Muslims, and you find that a lot of the Christian YouTubers go toe to toe, easily, handily beating Muslim Dawagandists.
Yeah.
We're at the point where we know their sources so well.
Yeah.
And
Well, the thing is, we don't need to know them. And I don't want people to be discouraged and go, oh, gee, I don't know enough. Well, if you know that Sharia, which is all people knew when I was young, okay, that you knew that Sharia allowed the stoning of women and that they were not treated fairly and that it killed apostates, that hasn't changed. It hasn't changed at all. So all you have to know is that it is the antithesis of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the charter, the constitution of your country, and say no, stop. We can't be encouraging this. We give government grants for these things. We have all this. We need to phase it out and do so kindly. I mean, there are people like that girl, in Toronto yesterday. She sincerely believes she's going to be very confused. I kind of hope she's listening to this today. You never know.
right.
But yeah, so what we don't want is people hurting each other over things they don't understand. And, 100 years from now, they're doing it again.
No, I think I feel somewhat optimistic and confident. I know that things are not good, but I think there's resistance that's building, and I think that you have a very silent, or rather silenced majority, and people don't like this. People don't want this. People actually, the majority of Westerners actually want mass remigration. They actually literally want to kick these migrants out of their countries. Now, it's not a popular view. It's not the politically correct view, but it is the prevailing view amongst those who are currently disenfranchised. And I see that a change will happen once the political will is found. And yeah, and if we can't talk about these issues, at some point there will be violence. And I think, that we should try to avoid. However,
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean that's beyond my control, but at least we can get the discussion going. And I think that I think there's reason to be optimistic. Let's just say that, because things are changing. The pendulum does swing the other way. And I know everyone feels powerless, but we are grains of sand, and many grains of sand makes for a landslide.
Absolutely. That's right.
One drop of water mixed with another drop of water, and you have a flood. And yeah, a grain of sand can grind your gears. A few grains of sand can halt those gears. So yeah, guys, let's be those grains of sand. Let's grind
Absolutely.
those gears, and let's just bring the gears to a grinding
Yep.
halt.
Yeah. Just shine
So
a light. Shine a light.
yeah, so yeah, and so
Well,
RX
it's been
says here
lovely talking
Poland.
to you.
Oh, thank you. RX says Poland strunk. Guys, I live in Poland. I am, as you can see, I'm not the right shade of Polish. And as much as the Polish government has made many steps to preserve its culture, let's just say that, to be frank, and I've said this before, the Polish government doesn't want me here. The Polish government makes my life very difficult. Okay, things get
Yeah.
very
You see,
unpleasant.
I was so shocked to
So
hear that when we spoke. That's never been the case in Canada, and I know people in the U.S. It's a different story, but
yeah,
that's another one of the reasons why we have to stop migrating.
yeah, yeah, but
Things that happen in one place. But
no, but
yeah,
I'm
that's
see, I'm not the kind of immigrant Poland wants. So the prevailing policy with the Polish government and the financial system is, you're not Polish, get out. To put it very politely. So let's just say, if I was from Switzerland, things would be a little different. But I'm not from Switzerland, so things are as they are, and that's a discussion for another day. But let's just say Polish policy. I like the fact that the country is safe and stable, but I'm lumped in exactly the same box as the kind of migrant who comes over and rapes women and demands welfare, even though I am not that person. So
Well,
that's
certainly it has nothing to do with the color of a person's skin. That's for darn sure. And just before we close, I'll mention that one thing is that the UK has now adopted this definition of Islamophobia, and it's actually been
yeah,
around for much longer. They've been talking about this from the all-party parliamentary group. They've been talking about it since 2017. Number of organizations have already adopted that definition, and the definition is Islamophobia, and I don't have it right in front of me, is criticism of Muslims or perceived Muslimness. So the thing is, what are they really trying to protect here? Because if they're really trying to protect people, why isn't the word Muslamophobia? Why not? Because, are people going to make that association of Islam and doctrine and go, well, that's, you can't talk about the doctrine, we have to
No, the
talk about the
UK,
doctrine.
I mean, the UK is obviously introducing Sharia blasphemy laws, and it's betraying
Yep,
its
yep,
population. And
yep.
I don't see how this can end in anything but,
No,
sadly, in anything but violence if they don't allow open
especially if you
discussion
conflate,
about it.
if you conflate people and doctrine, that is so wrong. Focus on the doctrine. The doctrine is, it's the doctrine that creates the jihadis. The jihadis didn't create the doctrine.
Yeah, no, true. So yeah, we can have this discussion another time. So I don't like to go on
Yeah,
too
we're
long,
running
but for the
over here.
170 plus people that have been here, thank you very much. Yeah, so your book is available on Amazon, right? The links are in the description, guys. If you
Yeah.
check all of her social links, Elaine's social links are in the description. Please
Oh,
find them
please
there,
do. Yeah.
including the link to the book. Everything is in the description below this video. And yeah, and also, guys, then tomorrow I have a meeting with Dr. Paul Sutcliffe. We're discussing Sharia again. And on Tuesday, I'm meeting with one of the original founding members of the British EDL, which is now a defunct organization. But he's one of the early founding members of the EDL, obviously started by Tommy Robinson. He and I should be meeting on Tuesday. He's had 2 cancellations. These were due to, I believe, another rape gang scandal. Some issues that he was trying to assist with, and that's taken precedent. So I will be meeting with him. So this is Gurmit Singh, and he and I'll be talking on Tuesday. So hopefully we won't have another cancellation. But yeah, that's unfortunate. But I understand if you've got this rape gang thing is just, it's unforgivable. The UK government has been criminally negligent, if not actually complicit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So guys, yeah, we should call it a
All
night.
right.
But thank you very much, Elaine, in
So
Canada.
nice to talk to you today, Lloyd.
Yeah, it's
Really
been really
enjoyed it.
fascinating.
Yes.
So thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Please check her links in the description, and we'll chat again
And
soon.
thank you,
Take care.
everyone who came. All right.
Thanks, everyone. God bless and goodbye.